When it comes to producing renderings, when it comes to producing construction documents and drawings, you or your firm most likely has a system, something that's repeatable, something that's easy to understand, easy to pass off to other staff, and it's usually static over time. Well, when it comes to marketing your design firm, the process of content creation, it's ever evolving, sometimes by the week. When you think about algorithms and platform changes and all that good stuff, and keeping up with the SEO for your firm's website, it can be overwhelming. But what I've seen in looking at the different content that design firms are putting out there is there are several big myths that many subscribe to and is actually keeping you from reaching your ideal clients. And this week, I have a messaging whiz that can help us better brand and market our design firms. Today, I'm happy to have Brandon Lucero on the program. Stay tuned. Giving architects and landscape architects the tools and strategies to be seen, heard, and valued in the marketplace, and telling the stories of leaders building thriving design firms and attracting their ideal clients. This is From Architecture to Profitecture. I'm your host, Jay Krakowski. Let's get started. Fellow and future Profitex, hello. How are you? Welcome to the show today. We're talking about the myths. 4 to be exact, 4 myths of content creation that are not just here for 2021, but actually I have seen for a number of years now that design firms are making, whether it's in a more static product like your website, but also getting into your email newsletters and certainly on social media. And this week I have one of my online mentors who I've learned a great deal from in producing content, both for my design firm and for the brand Profitecture by Design. He even had a hand in naming this podcast. He doesn't know that, but I'm happy to welcome to the show, Brandon Lucero. Brandon, thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I had no idea that I had a hand in naming the podcast, but that's awesome and such an honor. So thank you for having me.
I'm sure if you thought about it for a second, you could probably pick up on it based on the name, but
I did. I was like, wait a minute. I recognize what's going on here.
We won't give it away. You have to tune in for a little bit here and we'll see if we can get into it. So again, thank you for being here. You're in the swing of a video series launch coming up next week. I've been talking about that for the last few weeks, and we'll get to that towards the end of the show. But can you give, or rather, I should say that the vast majority of my audience probably has no idea who you are.
Right.
And can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you help small businesses and service providers with messaging and content?
Yeah. So my name is Brandon Lucero, and I help people with messaging and content. And more specifically, what we really help people do is create content that makes you unique, shows off your uniqueness, allows you to connect with the people you want to work with more. And then how do we take that message and what your brand is and put it into content so that it does bring those people in? And I think, one of the things that most people don't realize, or maybe they forget or just don't take into consideration, is that when we talk about content and we talk about messaging and social media and all this stuff, it's considered content marketing. And most people put out content to try to build an audience, get eyeballs, but they kind of forget about who am I attracting with this? How is this piece of content actually helping me close that person? Like, how am I building rapport? How am I building connection? How is it creating demand? And what we do is we really help brands and companies and entrepreneurs of all sizes start to craft what that message is and what content you should be doing so that ultimately gets those results that you want and doesn't just blend in with the sea of noise that's out there.
Mm-hmm. And have you found any differences, or do you have a different approach for I call it pure online entrepreneur, a course or online program creator versus someone who has an actual brick and mortar location, a service provider? Is there any difference there that you see?
Well, I'd say, with an online business so everything comes down to like connection. Everything comes down to shifting people's perspective, but also creating demand at the same time. And the elements that we use can really be used in any style of business, but they will change slightly depending on the type of business you're in. So for example, an online entrepreneur can probably just put out content, and it doesn't really matter where they live. It doesn't really matter what's going on in the local community. But a local based business would want to incorporate that type of identity. They would want to incorporate the local identity into their brand. And just to kind of give an example, there's a brewery here that like a microbrew that just started up here, and there's a lot of them out there, and we have a few of them in where I live. But what they started doing is they started naming all the drinks like local spots around the area. So it was like the Topa Topa like IPA, then Topa Topa is a mountain range out here, and they started just naming it based off of those things. And what they're doing is they're incorporating the local identity into their brand and into their messaging. And now what you start to find is people go there, not because the beer's better, but because it reinforces who they are. And that type of stuff kind of has been lost, I feel like, in marketing. And it doesn't matter if you're the local business, if you're the online entrepreneur, if you're a design firm or whatever, all these elements work. It's just depending on the type of business that you have, they might change on how you use them, but they still exist. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I didn't think I would ever equate a list of design services to a beer list, but there you go.
Well, there you go.
But it makes total sense, and that's one thing I preach as well to my community is to take, because there are industry standard terms for the different phases of design, and at the end of the day, the client doesn't care what they're called.
Right.
Often they don't even care that there are phases. They want the end product. But if you can start to, whether it's location or some sort of identity, some sort of branding to each of those phases, well, it becomes that much more engaging.
Yeah. And that's one of the things you have to, like, that's part of the process is figuring out what those identities are. Obviously with that local business and with it being beers, it would be like, they're just finding those local identities. With a design firm, it would be, looking at the identities of kind of what you specialize in, who you are, like what are the company core values, and then how do we create identities around those to attract people that are going to be the most aligned with what you offer and how you do it.
Great. All right. Well, how about we dig in and bust some myths here?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
The first one I see is that content messaging should be static. What right. I've seen is once a firm kind of establishes their values, honestly, their mission statement, that thing that often goes in a drawer and a folder on a server somewhere, after it's agonized over that every single post, every part of the website has to refer back to that. It can't deviate at all.
Right.
And I think one of the things that you like to explain, I must use the word preach, I don't know if it's preaching, but is that online content marketing, it's a fluid thing. It's an ever evolving thing. You don't know what's truly going to resonate with the audience unless you're testing.
Right. Yep. And so I'm going to say this at the risk of sounding like a weirdo, but messaging is a living, breathing organism. Like content marketing, that's just, maybe it's because I live, eat, and breathe it. I literally see it as like a living thing. But I say living thing because it does evolve. It does change. And I would imagine a lot of people listening have certain styles in which they like to use design or elements they like to incorporate into their designs. But 10 years ago, maybe they did things differently. Like even the way in which you design things probably evolves. And it's the same thing with messaging. And what I always like to say is when we create content, we create message. Yes, there might be like that static core promise of who we are and what we do. But what most people don't realize is there's different ways to communicate that. And sometimes we can't find the right way to communicate it if we aren't testing, if we aren't tweaking, if we aren't trying things differently. And I'll give one example. And Jake, I know you've heard me say this, but if my message, and I'll bring kids into this because I am a father, but if my message was for my son to clean his room, that was the message of my company, for example, I could say, hey, Will, go clean your room now. Or I could say, hey, Superman cleans his room in 5 minutes. Can you beat Superman? That's way more likely to resonate with my son. And then I get the action or the eyeballs or the attention that I want, because I have the same core message, but because I was testing different ways in which to communicate that message, I found the one that landed the most. And if we just stick with static content and messaging, it never allows us the opportunity to find the type of content or the words or the messaging that's going to land the most or the deepest.
Mm-hmm.
Make
Yeah,
sense?
it does. And the objection that relates to that I hear all the time is, oh, yeah, yes, we put stuff on social media just to have a presence, just to show our work, but it doesn't really get clients, so it's not really worth investing more time or effort in. Well,
Yeah.
if you've been putting out the same static image of every single building that you put out there, and yeah, the clients aren't calling because you're just looking at pictures of buildings. You're not actually delivering a connection.
Right. And it means it's not that it doesn't work, because obviously we know it works, which is why they're doing it in the first place. Like if it didn't work, there'd be no reason to even have done it in the first place. So we know it works. It's more of the approach you're using doesn't work, not the strategy or the platform not working.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously we all know the power of social media. We know that's the future. We know that's where eyeballs are. We know that content gets shared. We know people are researching stuff there. So if it's not working or it's not resonating or it's not bringing in the clients, it's not that the platform is off or the strategy doesn't work. It's that the way you're using the platform or the strategy that doesn't work. And what I always say is, if I can give the same strategy to 10 people, they all get different results. You really have to ask, well, why is that? And it's because of what they're filling the strategy up with that
Mm-hmm.
makes the difference. And that's what content is. That's what messaging is what we fill the strategy up with, because what we're saying and what we're doing within the strategy is what really builds the connection.
Mm-hmm. That definitely makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Number 2, messaging should appeal to as many people as possible. This is a big one with going vanilla with your content. Again, just putting images up, but not actually taking a stand, or just listing your services. Well, that's not really messaging. That's just a list of services.
Right.
So what have you found in narrowing down that message, or even being polarizing in a message? You wouldn't think that you could be polarizing as an architect, other than I like this style, I don't. But
Right.
How have you approached this?
Yeah. And so I just believe that business nowadays needs to have some kind of like deeper purpose, or they need to identify things that don't work anymore and kind of take a stand against that. And that really allows us to evolve the industry. It allows us to better the industry, it allows us to end suffering. If someone has a belief in something that, or there's an industry norm out there that people believe to be true, and we know that it's not really the true or the best way, but they're getting stuck because of it, we can free them from that. One of the things that I do know, and I know everyone has experienced this, is when you want something particular, when you want something done a certain way, you tend to go find someone who specializes in those things. Like if I wanted my kitchen redone, I'm usually not going to go like for a general contractor who does everything. I'm going to find someone who specializes in kitchen remodels. And then if there's a certain type of kitchen remodel that I want, that I know someone specializes in, then I'm going to pay for that. And so when we start to appeal to everyone, when we start to just be very vanilla, that's what most people do. And marketing rule like 101 is, we don't want to do the same thing that everyone does, because then we blend in. Right. But when we start to take a stand, when we start to say, this is what I do and I don't work with anyone else, or this is what I specialize in, or I kind of take a stand against this because this is outdated and this could lead to problems, we start to communicate in a way that the audience hasn't heard before. And that's kind of like Seth Godin's purple cow philosophy.
I was about to go there.
Yep. So it's like, what cow stands out in the field of all the other cows? It's the one that's purple.
Right.
And people start to connect with that. They start to not only like, their eyeballs not only start to go to you, but they start to like you because of that one thing. Mm-hmm. And so sure, you might not have huge amounts of appeal to everyone. So you might not have this massive amount of numbers, but what starts to happen is you have huge conversion rates on the people that do align with those things. And when we can align and take a stand on a certain thing, we get the eyeballs, we get the connection. And really what's happening is they like us because they start to believe in the same things that we believe in. And then it just ends up being people that we really like working with too. And what starts to happen is you actually start to get rid of a lot of these like pain in the butt clients, because you're connecting on other things besides just the work. It's like beliefs and values and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. What's often equally or almost as hard is that it's, at least in these professional design services, it's a longer track. It's not just a launch and you're launching a course and here's cart open, cart close date, but they're thinking in 6-12 months, I'm going to need these services. So if you can get into their heads earlier. So it's the long game of content creation, which is why everything we're talking about today is so important, to get things dialed in or at least moving in the right direction so that when they're ready to call, your firm's already on their short list. So.
Right. And that even goes back to what we were talking about before, which is like, people do it and they say they don't get the results. It's sometimes you won't see the results for you, especially in this business. You won't see the results for a while. And to me, that's also why we should be testing. That's also why we should be tweaking and paying attention, because if we're doing something the wrong way, we might not know for like 6 months because it does take a while for them to like finally pick up the phone and call. Mm-hmm.
And then on the back end of that, the work we do, sometimes it's 5 years before the finished product is there.
Right.
So then when you go to something that's immediate all day long of scrolling, I should be able to put a post and somebody should call, right? So
yeah. I know. We worked with a contractor one time who was like, "What? We put it up last night. I haven't gotten any calls." And it was like, "We got to do some testing. We got to do some tweaking." And then once we did all the work, he started to get, like 2 months later, it was like the phone kept coming off the hook because he's finally getting, this is back when we were like ranking videos and stuff like that. It's like the rankings and different things. But yeah, it takes time sometimes for sure.
Gotcha. Yeah. And we didn't touch on that as we're trying to focus on messaging, but you kind of started out in the YouTube space. Is that right? Or
that's kind
video
of
production.
That is kind of how we fell into it, is we started doing a lot of like YouTube work and stuff like that and getting videos ranked to the top. But then we started realizing, like, even if you get a video ranked to the top, if you're not saying the right things in the videos, it does you absolutely no good. Like, there's two things. You need the eyeballs, number one, which is what SEO did. But then if you don't have the right messaging inside of that video or on your website, then it does you no good, because the eyeballs just leave and they go somewhere else until they find something that does capture their attention. And then what we've transitioned to is like rankings take a really long time. And we moved to using like Facebook through Blake campaigns and stuff, where for a lot of people don't know what that is. Basically, you can put a video on Facebook or Instagram and you can target exactly who you want, and you can do it within 24 hours. And it's really inexpensive. And if you combine that with really good messaging, you can get traction really quick with those two things. But yeah, I feel like sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, especially for designers that are targeting a local market or a city, you can narrow it down to the nth degree on Facebook.
Yeah. And even you can target people that make a certain amount of money, live in a certain town, and like just their interests, like what type of things do they like and follow on. I mean, it's crazy. It's almost a little spooky as a consumer, but as a business owner who wants to target the right person, it's pretty awesome.
Right.
but yeah, it is available and definitely should be utilized for sure.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, that's exactly what I say. I feel like we're getting off track now.
Go down that rabbit hole. All right.
Yeah.
Let's get to myth number 3 then.
Cool.
Content should be perfectly produced, like the construction documents and the drawings that we come up with, that we agonize over often late into the hours of the night. When it comes to online content, it's almost the reverse that often makes the connection. Is that what you found?
Yeah, I think for the longest time, maybe 5 years ago, like really produced content did really well because there wasn't a lot of people doing it. Like there weren't a lot of cameras and things easily accessible. So when you saw it, you're like, wow, this is really awesome. But nowadays, like for $1,000, you can get a really good camera and a whole setup that makes video look really good. And the trend we've been finding, and again, this is why we need to test, because you have to uncover what's really working. And what we found is, through all of our clients and all the work and students that we've worked with, is that a lot of really what people would kind of like call unprofessional videos end up doing the best. And the reason why is because of the connection that it allows you to have. And there might be instances where a perfectly produced video would help, like maybe on your website, having an about us video that's professionally produced, maybe. But when it comes to marketing, we want to push stuff out quick. We want to test quick. We want to show the real person. Like there's a reason why things like vlogging have taken off, because it shows real life is thing. We look at like reality TV, even though it may not be real life, but people perceive it as real life. There's this deeper connection. We really get to know the person behind the camera. And that's how people are making decisions with buying now. And that really has been the thing for the longest time, is that when you go into a sales meeting and stuff, sure, you could give a really good pitch of what you're going to do. But if the person doesn't like you, they're not going to sign up with you. Mm-hmm. And if they do really like you, they will be willing to work with you on a much deeper level. And we want to move quick. We want to move fast. And this allows us to do that. So my rule of thumb is on those types of videos, with content and messaging, like 70% perfect is perfect. 100% perfect is failure. And we have to understand our version of perfect is just an illusion in our head. Like we without realizing it, we've set a bar of like, this is what perfect is. And everyone has a different bar of what perfect actually means. And so we're kind of just chasing this thing that we created in our head, and it really slows us down, stops the testing, stops the tweaking. And I mean, like I said, I've worked with contractors who have literally filmed videos with their phones and got multi-million-dollar jobs from it. Mm-hmm. And it's because of that authenticity. It's the rawness. It's the connection that stuff can bring you.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a landscape designer here at my town. I'm going to have her on the show, say next month. She's a one-woman show. She puts her iPhone on a tripod and she just films herself sketching. She's almost at 31,000 Instagram followers and is just doing crazy stuff all over the Southeast because she just said, I'm going to work, and I turn on the camera and I go to work, and people want to see that. People don't need to see, 1,000 transitions and as you said, a super fancy setup. Well, you did say $1,000 camera. Well, this, this is $1,000 camera right here.
Yeah. Your phone is $1,000 camera for sure. Yeah,
it really is. So,
but the thing is too, is, people make buying decisions off of, like, they make it off subconsciously. Even though we think we're making a conscious decision, the decision's already been made on, and science will back this up and prove it. I'm not going to bore everyone here because you can go into like all this crazy neurons and brain science, but we make our buying decision subconsciously before we're consciously aware of it. And then we think we make it consciously, but it's already been subconsciously done. And what happens is, with the example you gave, is she's showing the real life. She's showing her skills, number one. She's also showing who she is. She's probably revealing things like identities and values that she has, and how how her brain works and how her process works. And that's what the people are really going to be buying from. They're not buying because of the quality of the camera you used, or like you said, how many transitions you had. So because she's able to reveal these things on a subconscious level, people will automatically feel like, I really like her. I really like her designs, and I really like just what she's doing. And sometimes professional videos that are like 100% perfect, they neglect all of that stuff. And that stuff is vital for making sales and really making sales because of who you are and what you believe in.
Right. And then the other component to that is the live stream component that I try to encourage folks to do when they're just doing walkthroughs. You'll see photos posted on Instagram of just the framing done and maybe some hashtags. But if you were to do a live stream and actually explain what's going on in your head, say this is why it's important to look at ABC XYZ. It's not just a quote unquote progress photo. But start to let people into your brain, as I like to say. Yeah. That definitely adds up over time. So
100%, totally does.
That makes sense. Cool. Kind of along those lines of teaching, but a myth that the only content that you put out should be teaching, whether that's how to or what to do, as you often say. That 100% of your firm's content should be that, and there's a few other missing pieces that I'll let you dive into.
For sure. So I will say, because I love this one. This is one that I'm really passionate about. But I will come out and say, we still want to do like the educational, the how, the what type of content. Where it becomes a problem is when we do it 100% of the time. And what most people will do is they'll do videos that are like all how to educational. And then they'll do like these professional about us videos thinking that those are sales videos. And then they try to push the two together, and it doesn't really work. And one of the reasons why it doesn't work on multiple levels, number one, when we teach and we just educate all the time, you have to understand our competitors are likely teaching and doing very similar things. I would imagine, and please correct me if this is an ignorant statement because I just don't know, that when it comes to design, yes, there's different ways to do design, like to get different styles and looks. But I would imagine structurally, there's a lot of processes in which you have to follow. Is that a correct statement? A fair statement?
It is. I had a architect duo on a couple of weeks ago, and he said at the end of the day, structure. No, he said structure is stacking S on top of S. That's what it is.
So
it's really that simple at the end of the day, but
right.
It's obviously more nuanced than that.
Yeah. So when it is that type of stuff, and then that's where we stick with our teaching and stuff, you literally start teaching the same thing as everyone else, because it is very much of a process. And if you teach process, then everyone's teaching process, and you don't stand out at all. Right. So even when you do the how-to educational content, you want to divide it up. You want to be a little more unique with it. Like I always use Simon Sinek. Hopefully people know who Simon Sinek is, or at least maybe look at TED Talks. Most people know what a TED Talk is. They all teach and they all educate, but a lot of them aren't doing it by step. Most of them on TED Talks and like Simon Sinek teaches leadership, and he's not the only person teaching leadership, but he doesn't do this step by step. He looks at it as, okay, here's what most people think. How do I start to share a story and a lesson to shift their perspective and get them to see something differently? And that type of education, that type of content, that type of stuff works again to how the subconscious mind processes stuff, because you're communicating in a way that people haven't heard things before. And that automatically allows you to stand out. That automatically plays that contrast role where like, whoa, I haven't heard this before. I love how this person teaches, because you're giving these like mind blowing moments. And so when we teach, we teach the same thing as everyone else, we blend in. So number one, we have to look at different ways to do teaching and what topics are we choosing to teach on? And is there something that we have a different perspective on that most people don't have this perspective on, that we can teach and we can educate? That's number one. Number two is when it comes to content, we also want to focus on connection. And I kind of hinted at this already, but what connection would be is identifying what are your core values as an individual and as a company. What core values that you have do you want your customers to have? So for me, like my core values, number one is family, number two is business, number three is integrity. And I decided that I'm going to include all three of those into my business. So when I start to create content, I actually talk about integrity. I talk about entrepreneurship. I talk about being a family man. And I've mentioned it a few times in this podcast. And what starts to happen is when people make those buying decisions, they don't realize what's happening, but they start to make the decisions of who they want to work with based off those connection elements. And if we're not putting that into our content, then we lose that edge. And what I mean by that is, let's say someone was listening to this podcast episode, and then they listen to another one a month from now, and they decide, I need to work with someone, but they heard that I was a father and I operate with integrity. Those are my core values. And the other person didn't mention that. I have a much better chance of being liked by that person making the decision, because I've been a parent and they're a parent, and I have integrity, and they like someone who operates integrity. They probably have integrity themselves. So the buying decision becomes something of a connection type of thing. And when we look at Red Bull, the energy drink, for example, you go to their Instagram page, there's nothing about the drink there. Right. It's all extreme sports, jumping off cliffs, stuff like that, the adrenaline junkie, because that's the identity of the person who will drink the Red Bull drink. That's their branding. That's who they're going after. So they just create content that reinforces that identity. And so that's what we would call connection content. And that needs to be a part of your strategy. It needs to be a part of the brand. It needs to be a form of content that you're doing in order to scale out your design firm and to get some traction. And then the last element that we talk about is what I call thought reversal. And I kind of hinted at this already, but it's identifying like, what are these industry norms that you don't like, or you see causing suffering in people's lives? Like maybe there's a style of design that's like outdated, or we have found over time that is not totally structurally, up to standards anymore, but people still do it for some reason. We can actually take a stand against that type of stuff, and we can start to use thought reversal to see things differently. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense with the thought reversal content?
It does. It does, certainly.
Okay.
And one thing, when you were talking about the connection piece, it's almost just to jump back, is that it's almost more of at a subconscious level than just a straightforward about us video that you see on a lot of businesses' websites.
Right.
That you're digging into the deeper values. And then another thing you said was that I picked up on, the values that you want your clients to have, not just the look and the type of projects, but the values you want them to have, not just pushing your values out into the world, but
right,
trying to connect the two. I think it is super powerful.
Yeah, I think you kind of mentioned this before the show. Is it some of these beliefs that people have around content comes from like that scarcity thinking, mm-hmm. and so they think like I need to do the selling, I need to appeal to everyone because there's not enough, blah 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 blah. But when you start to get rid of the scarcity thinking of like there's not enough, and you start realizing, this is who I want to work with. This is what I believe in. This is the type of design I like to do. And you start to get to the core of who you are and your company. And that's what you put in the content. What starts to happen is you get higher conversions and more sales from people that are in total alignment with who you are. And we start getting really bad clients and taking on projects we don't want to take on when we try to go after everyone. We're too scattered, because when we're scattered, we literally attract everyone. And hopefully this is relatable, but I was watching this video, and I don't know how it came on my newsfeed, but it came on my newsfeed, and it was Jesse James, who does a ton of motorcycle designs, mm-hmm. and he works with a lot of celebrities and stuff. And he has a way in which he does his design, and the way in which the people he works with. And he said, if I don't like the person, I will not work with that person. And he said, there's been instances where I didn't like someone, and I said, I will not work with that person. And so he stuck to his values, and he just attracts more people. They're like, I like that about you. That's what sets you apart. Most people would say like, oh, I need to take on all the work. He's like, no. I'm going to do it this way, and I'm going to make more sales because of it. One more thing he did is he doesn't make yellow bikes. He doesn't like the way yellow looks on a motorcycle. So he's just like, that's part of our company philosophy. We will not make a yellow bike. And he said that, who was it? It was Sylvester Stallone had bought like a yellow Ferrari, a yellow like something else, and wanted a yellow bike to go with it. And he told them no. And they got into like a little tiff or a fight. But that's what I mean, is like he knows, here's the designs I like to do. Here's the people I like to work with. He puts that out there, he stands by it, and he actually thrives because of it, because all the people that are in alignment with that come to him. And now he has an amazing work life because he's working with people he loves working with, making designs that he loves doing. So it's a little counterintuitive than what most people think and do. But when we start to think that way and change our content to adjust to that, it becomes a really powerful place to build a business from. Mm-hmm.
Well, I could see, the idea of niching down your architectural designs or your landscape designs. I don't think that's necessarily foreign to this industry. The dilemma there is in a firm that's say 3 years or less, and right. they're saying, well, gosh, we feel like we have to take on everything. Well, that's where leaning on this more connection-based, values-based content can be the thing to kind of get you going, to speed things up.
Yeah, 100%.
That's great. So, as I mentioned in the start of the video, you've got a video series coming out next week. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we have a free series. It's a 5-part video series training that basically walks a little bit deeper on the things we talked about today. So we start to talk about, how do we find core values? What core values do we want? How do we find those identities? and how do we start to craft that message for our brand. And then it moves into, by I think about video 3, it moves into, okay, now that we have all this stuff identified, how do we turn it into content? How do you take that message and put it into content so it starts to attract the right people? You start to build these connections. And then we move into communication style. And it's like, okay, now that I know the overall message and the identities and all that stuff, and I know the content, how do I communicate so that it automatically hits the subconscious mind to the audience? So they not only know that they like us, but they feel it instantly. They can feel who we are. They can feel that they have a connection with us. They can feel like there's certain ways in which we can communicate so that people, when they watch it, automatically go, yes, I love that person. And we kind of wrap up the series at that point. But by the end of the series, you should be very clear on what you need to do when it comes to creating content that's going to stand out, create demand for your service. Oh, that's one thing we didn't talk about. How do we connect all this content to your offer, to what you sell, so that when people are watching it, they get this feeling of, I want that. I need to work with that person. We talk about that in the series as well. But by the end of it, you should have all the elements you need of what to do to start putting all of this stuff together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that should be the thing that rings true most, or rings true the most for folks if they're going to go ahead and sign up is having the content create demand. I talked about it a bit yesterday in the boot camp that I ran.
Right.
Was creating. It's not the sale or the pitch. It's actually longer term demand, and it's your name being at the tip of the tongue or the forefront of their mind.
Yeah.
I think I used the Starbucks example yesterday. It's a lot of people in this country or around the world would say, they wouldn't say, do you want to go out and get a coffee? They'd say, do you want to go and get a Starbucks?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's synonymous. And, am I saying that every design firm will be, maybe your design firm will be synonymous with architecture in your local market if you do it right.
Yeah. 100%. I think the way, I mean, we're looking at like landscape design right now. Like we're going to be redoing the backyard. And so what we're doing, like literally, is going on Instagram and we're looking at hashtags and we're finding styles in which, that we like what kind of styles do we like, what's going to look good in the backyard. And what's really funny is we start to realize there starts to become these like Instagram accounts or these businesses that we tend to just keep liking over and over again. Like, and it's things like, what are they standing for? Who's the one actually teaching and talking? And my wife, I remember, and I wish I would have remembered this earlier in the podcast to bring up the story, but when she looked at one of the ones she showed me, one of the ones she liked, she didn't really tell me that she liked the design. She's like, I really love the person who's in the videos, like talking about, she really takes the time to like figure out what each person wants. And she loved like that. She loved the person, not necessarily, she wasn't making her decisions based off of the designs. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, is like, how do we create that for you? And that's essentially what the video series will help you start putting together.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that should be probably another big takeaway of busting these myths, is that you need to be, whether it's you or your staff collectively, you need to be putting you as a human being out there into the world, because it's a long working relationship. It's not just a transaction. It's often months or rather often years, especially when you think about a larger construction project. They're going to be working with this person, so you better have some level of rapport or some sort of connection. And
yeah,
there are better ways to do that than others. So
yeah, for sure.
Hopefully today helps. Well, hey, I really appreciate your time today, Brandon. As he mentioned, the Content Revolution video series starts March 1st. It's a few days here for catching us live. And if you're watching YouTube or listening to the podcast, that's today. Get yourself signed up for that, profitexturebydesign.com/content. You'll be able to watch that series. Is this a dripped out over day, or is this can we Netflix and binge it?
You can Netflix and binge it. So
hey.
if you are able to register before or on March 1st, we are also going to be watching it live with you if you want to do that. So we're going to be doing it twice at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I think at 3 Pacific Standard Time. I mean, it's available. You don't have to watch it with me, but if you want to join us and everyone else that are watching it together online, that is available as well. But you can sit down, binge it as much as you want. It'll be up for a week or two.
Awesome. About that watch party, any commentary or Q&A, or is that just a place to go?
And that's what we plan on doing. There's 4 videos that will be up, and then the 5th one will be released a week after March 1st on the 8th. And so we're going to watch each video together, and then I'm going to go through and give my commentary on okay, here's the major things to take away from this. Are there questions? And we'll try to do as many questions as we can. There will be some interaction for sure after each video.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, visit ProfitextureByDesign.com/content to get yourself signed up for that video series. Once again, Brandon, I appreciate your time for coming on the show here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. We'll talk soon. Hopefully that was helpful for you this week. You can find him also at I am Brandon Lucero on Instagram if you want to connect with him directly there. But absolutely get yourself signed up for the video series. I happen to have had a sneak peek. It's pretty awesome. I'm going to leave you with a quote of the week from Meredith Hill. When you speak to everyone, you speak to no one. If your firm's marketing message is so diluted and so vanilla because you're afraid of losing any client that you want to capture each and every client imaginable out there, well, you're going to come off as vanilla ice cream to everyone, and that's going to make building your brand and building a sustainable and successful design firm that much harder. If you haven't done so already, leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. I'd love to hear from you. Hopefully I've earned a 5-star review from you, and any other questions, reach out. I'm at Jake Krakowski on pretty much all of the social channels. Until next week, go out and make it a great week because our success is inevitable. Take care. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you stay up to date with future episodes. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn at Jake Krakowski. And for show notes and much more, visit ProfitextureByDesign.com/podcast.